Okay, so I would like to welcome you to this webinar dedicated to mockups. Just as a brief reminder, what we're looking into today, it's what is the mockup in general, what the value the mockups bring to the process. In fact, there is a lot of value, but I'd like to highlight how they specifically help to speed up the requirements and delivery process, to discover new requirements, to get people to work together. I'll do my best to be as practical as possible and show you how to create a mockup from scratch to reflect different states of the app on the mockups and reduce the amount of specs you write, actually. Now, if you're watching this webinar, most likely you're already working with a customer on a daily basis, so you're probably either a product manager or a product owner or a project manager, or likewise a team lead or a developer or a QA engineer who works with a customer on a daily basis. A couple words about myself. My name is Vladimir Murnenko. I'm a product manager, education enthusiast. Currently, I work in a London-based startup that tries to crack the music industry. Previously, I worked in a number of software companies of various size, from 60 people to a couple thousand even. I did software business analysis, product ownership, product management. I was even a BA team lead for some time too. All of that gave me a lot of it. Quite happy and quite hesitant to share with you. I put the description, some links to my profile to the webinar description. Now, the topic of today's conversation is the mockups. I don't know how much you know about them. I presume nearly nothing. Except there is a tool that is called mockups, and it's got something to do with the user interface. So high five to those who Googled it before the webinar to get an idea. In fact, this is a fantastic tool for gathering, discussing, and confirming requirements. You can also use it for sign-off with a customer if you follow a formal process. Now, what is a mockup? A mockup is a prototype or a model of the application page or screen. There are two ways to interpret that, in fact. One way is the more traditional, is that the mockup presents the draft layout of the screen. It shows where different UI elements are located and roughly how these elements will look like. This is not the final user interface design of the screen. Rather, it is used to get all the stakeholders on the same page when you're discussing a particular story. There are obviously different groups of stakeholders and different parts of the process that can benefit from using mockups. Now, the first one is, this is an example of the mockup, by the way. This is a mailbox of some mail service. Okay. Now, the first group of stakeholders, the big one, is the business people. Now, how can mockups help you? Right? They can help you to visualize the requirements and speed up the discussion between the business people and the product owners or business analysts. If you talk to a customer and take part in gathering requirements, you probably know how valuable your customer's time is and how few they actually have it. Don't make them read long specs and email comments back to you. Show the mockup and get their immediate feedback, just in a meeting or a call. It might be difficult indeed to say what works well and what doesn't until you ship the product to the user. But if anything is wrong with the mockup, these people will be ready to tell it to you up front. And this is one of the useful tips. Appreciate your senior stakeholders' time and use mockups in meetings rather than long specifications. Now, the other important group of stakeholders is the developers. So how can mockups help you with the development? They can help improve communication with developers and the development process as a whole. Instead of saying, like, filter is the rectangular button in the top left right corner of the screen, just below the login form, you can show the mockup and point to the button. Of course, it might happen that you need some very specific instructions regarding the button size, font color, and so on. And in this case, you would need to add some more details into your specification. But still, the mockup is very good to begin with, as it gives the high-level understanding to everyone involved in the process. So another useful tip is write less specifications. It's a bit counterintuitive, but with mockups you can actually afford that. In fact, not just write less specs, but replace them where it's possible with mockups, because they're more visual, they're more universal. You don't even need to speak English or some other language very good to understand them. Now, testing can also benefit from using mockups. First of all, it can help speed up the whole process, and then it can also provide a baseline for testing. The QA engineer doesn't need to read through the long text descriptions of some user interface elements. They just need to take a look and then take a look at the mockup and then at the screen and compare and see if anything is wrong. So the other useful tip is before the development starts, gather the whole team, including engineers and QA people, and explain the feature. And use the mockups to align everyone's understanding so that after the development is done and the testing process starts, there is no misunderstanding as to how this or that feature should look like. Another thing I would like to mention about the mockups is that they're quite close to Agile, but they're not necessarily Agile instrument. Although they help you to increase collaboration, which is one of the Agile values. By delivering a mockup, you can engage your stakeholders in the discussion easily and quite early in the process. Now, it can also help you reduce the documentation that you need for development. So you need to spend less time on writing it, and everyone else spends less time reading it. And this results in shipping the product faster, which is another Agile value. And you think of the user while you are drawing your mockup, because this is a visual tool. It gives everyone the understanding of what the user will see. So there is a lot of overlap between Agile and mockups, but I would like to highlight once again, it doesn't mean that mockups can only be used in Agile. Another example of the mockup is this fitness app, for example. You can see that this is not the exact design. It's got some really rough controls. It doesn't specify any size, font, or anything. However, it gives everyone, hopefully, a solid understanding of what's going to be presented on the screen, like the activities that user has been engaged in, their weekly stats, how much they did of this or that sport. It also presents the menu and so on. Now, I mentioned that there are two ways how you can interpret the term mockup, and we've just considered the first one, and the second one is the designer's way. By saying mockup, most designers mean a design screen. It would be a full-scale model of the screen with all the elements done exactly how they should look. The copy, font, and size, and all the images will be like they're expected to be in the final app. So keep in mind that, and always clarify, this is another useful tip, what the other person means by the word mockup. So in this webinar, we're considering the more traditional approach to them, more product owners, business analysts approach, which is the mockup is rather a prototype or a model of the application page or screen. Just to summarize, the mockup's value is increased collaboration, reduced documentation, faster product shipment, and user-oriented approach. Let's look at some tools that you can use while you're drawing mockups. So the first one is paper and pencil. I mean, that's the oldest and most natural tool you can use. It's just a combination of a sheet of paper and a pencil. In fact, people have used them for ages, and they used to draw what they wanted to build. As long as, okay, it was long ago just ink and some paper, not a pencil, but still you get the idea. One of the biggest pluses of this tool is that you can always have a piece of paper and a pencil with you. But the biggest minus is that it's quite hard to make changes. If you do a couple changes to your napkin painting, you will need to trash it quite soon. So the other very useful tool is the whiteboard and the marker. Now, drawing on the whiteboard is a quick and fun way to explain something. It can be an ad hoc drawing, and the biggest plus of it is almost infinite possibility to draw. Although, unlike paper, you cannot save them, but you will almost certainly have a smartphone with you, or at least someone in your group will have, so you can take a photo and then recollect what you've drawn after a while. Every time you draw something big, you can, in fact, you even have to take a photo of the previous picture, because you will need to erase the next one. Alternatively, some old school guys can use a blackboard and a piece of chalk. Of course, these options are nice, but what if you don't have as much artistic abilities as I do, for example? I'm not quite sure how to measure them, but I will just round it up to 0. Thankfully, in this day and age, there's a whole lot of software tools that can help you. I don't think they're too powerful and too design oriented. Now, people who are short of time and artistic skills, just like myself, need something fairly easy to use and something that will have a number of UI components at my disposal. Now, a few things that I know, a few apps and services that I know are, by the way, another useful tip, right? To draw together with people whatever you're discussing and take a photo afterwards. That's just a summary of the previous slide. So a couple of digital tools that I know is the mockups.com. It's a web app. It's pretty nice. Creately.com, which is also a web app. Axure is a desktop app. It's quite a powerful one, actually. I'm not quite sure you will be pleased to use it, but still, it's a good app. And balsamic.com. This is a desktop app, and they have a web plugin as well. And why I made it bold is because, in my opinion, it's one of the best, if not the best, app in the market on the market that allows you drawing mockups. Now, in this webinar, further on, I will draw some examples using Balsamic. It's very intuitive, and it's got a good choice of ready-made controls. It's a paid app. I think it costs $89 for one desktop license. But good news is that you have a 30-day free trial to try and understand if you want to pay for it, or you can probably get your company to pay for it as well. Now, let me open the Balsamic instrument, and we will try to draw something. Okay, let me first check, though, if you have any questions. Okay, no questions. Or are there? Okay, I guess no. So anyway, if you've got any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. I will try and check it from time to time. But then at the end of this webinar, we'll have some 10-15 minutes to walk through your questions. Okay, well, now let's try and draw something. Now, before we draw anything, I would like to give you probably a brief tour over Balsamic. So you see we have a big canvas here. And the number of elements on the top. These controls, these are pre-made UI elements that you can use. They are grouped into segments or sections or groups to make your navigation easier. Although I think once you use it for a couple of days, you will remember what is the title of any component that you're looking for, and you will be able to use it to use the search field. So, for example, the canvas. You can just simply drag and drop the controls that you need. You can then resize them and do some other things that we will consider along the way. Now, the first example I would like to use is something that we're all pretty well familiar with, I guess. This is the login screen. And let's imagine that you're developing a mobile app, and you now have to write a story for enabling the social login to the app. The social means via any social network like Facebook and Google, for example. It's probably one of the most straightforward things ever. So the point in writing the detailed requirements for the user story that describes the social login, if everyone knows how it should work. In the agile world, we should focus on delivering the working software rather than the specifications. But you know, my inner voice keeps telling me that it's not quite good to write any code without specs at all. So another useful tip, I guess, is don't rely on such thing as common sense. Don't assume that people know what you mean by login screen, for example. Spend some 15 minutes and draw a mockup instead. All right, so what we need to do to draw a mockup for a login screen? First of all, of course, we need to find some element for the phone. Okay, Balsamiq presents quite a good choice of ready-made controls, as I mentioned, and here we can see this nice iPhone image. Obviously, yeah, we can resize it, as I already mentioned, but let's keep it like that. To allow user login to the app, we basically need a couple buttons, I think. So now I'm using the search, you see, button. By default, it will have the text button, but you can double click and add it. Now I will key in Facebook. Likewise, in this button section, you can drag and drop the button and call it, say, Google Plus. Now, it still doesn't quite look like the app or anything, so I think we need to add a bit of an explanation to the user what we're trying to do here. So there is a whole lot of choice if you want to add the text, but what I personally prefer is the paragraph of text. Here it is. Why I prefer this one? Because it allows you quite nice formatting, and it also gives you a hint how you can do this or that formatting. You see there is the link, the italics, the underscore, and the strike through, and if you double click, you will see how this formatting is done. Now let me add some text, something like join our community of the brightest people. Okay. Say this is some social network, for example. Okay, in order for the login screen to look appealing, I think normally you would want to add some image as well. Now this is how it can be done. This is just an image placeholder, but I can actually choose the real image in JPEG or PNG format. This is done in such a way. Just follow me. You can upload specific project assets, which is images that you've taken from elsewhere, from the internet or whatever. I don't have any assets here yet because this is a new project, but I can add some. Now I will browse the drive for an image that I have already found previously. So this is how it looks. There is another nice feature that allows you to sketch the photo so that it looks more like a Balsamiq image. In the real world, I would advocate against using the real images in the mockups for a very simple reason. If further along the way you change your view on that, your previous mockup will be out of date and you will have to maintain it, you will have to upload a new image, and so on and so forth. While if there is just a placeholder like this, then it's always a placeholder, you know. You can add the requirements for your particular image later on along the way. But anyway, I just wanted to show you how this feature works in Balsamiq. This is why I added the real picture there. All right. So the question is now, I think, whether the mockup will work instead of the spec. No, but you can write less of the spec. I already mentioned, I guess, that there are other benefits like improved communication and the use of the universal language, which is the visual language, instead of English or any other language. And of course, there can be things that you cannot reflect on the mockup. Like, for example, if you want to collect some user data from the social networks, be it Facebook, Google+, like user first and last name, email, etc., you have to add it in the acceptance criteria for your user story. There is no way you can add it into the mockup. Also, if you want to say that upon the registration, user will be logged into the app, this is also part of the acceptance criteria. But the benefit of the mockup that you don't need to explain anymore to the developers that the Facebook has to be the first button, the Google Plus is the second button, there should be the copy above that is aligned somehow, and the image, and so on. So you can spare on documenting these requirements. Okay, there might also be some error cases that you want to reflect in your user story. For example, if there is no connection, this is something that you can reflect on your mockup. Let me show you how it can be done. I just copied and pasted the image, and now I will add a dialog. That would say something like no connection. And for example, the retry button. I mean, ideally, we would like to add some more text and so on, but essentially, this is how it can be done. Okay. Now, this mockup reflects two different states of the app. The state one is when you just launch the app for the first time, and mockup number 2 reflects the case when you tap to register, but there is no active connection. Now, this was just a warm-up, so let's try and work on something a bit more interesting, a bit more complicated. Let me check first if you have any questions. Seems no. Great. So I suggest we will work on the profile screen now. That's also very common, and if you ever worked on some product that is end user facing, open to the wide public, not something internal for some company to use, then you've probably come across the task to work on the profile. The vast majority of web and mobile applications have this profile screen. So before we start, let me give you a quick question to think about. Why do users need the profile screen at all? Or in agile terminology, what is the user value behind that? Just think about it for like 15 seconds and post an answer into the chat, and then we will proceed. Okay. Any ideas, guys? Why do users need the profile screen? What's the value behind that? Yes, the user profile. Why would you need the user profile in the app? Okay, so I've got a couple things that I can mention, and I'm pretty sure that whatever you're thinking about right now will fall into either of those categories. So, for example, if you're designing a game, if you're developing a game, the profile will show the user the achievements of their player, any bonuses, any levels, scores, connection with other players, yeah, gender location, and so on. That's if the game is pretty social. Now, in fact, in social networks, in social apps, there is much more user information, like education, like work experience, some interests, likes, family, yeah, whatever. Can be lots of things. Now, also, a fair proportion of the good products is the e-commerce. Yeah, so for e-commerce, that would be the user payments, shipping information, recent transactions, some bonus points, open claims, returns, and whatever. Yeah, so special deals that user has probably taken. So there might be some other types as well, of course, so like some streaming services like news, video. They can hold the user status and payment information. Some categories that user follows or feeds that user is subscribed to, and perhaps we can distill some other types of products, but I think that's enough. I hope you can see that the profile screen can serve various purposes, and not just one. Now I would like to take e-commerce as an example, just because the industry has been growing fast and will keep growing, I'm sure, in the short and midterm perspective. So yeah, when I start working on the mockup, I always try to think of a high-level layout first. Like, what blocks of information will I have, and which of them are most important to the user? And only then I get to the particular fields and elements. This is called a top-down approach. It's not my personal invention, it's a common practice, I would say. So let's sorry. Let's put some browser window to begin with. Okay. Right. So what would be the basic blocks if we're thinking of the e-commerce user profile? Now, definitely, this will be some user payment information, I guess. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to put some big blocks onto the screen, and I would call them payment information. Now, what else? Something like user shipping information, like what is the address of the user they want to get the items delivered to. Another important thing is, I guess, the history of the transactions. Let's call it recent transactions, like what the latest purchases the user has made. And maybe something like the wish list too. So for example, if you're looking for something, but you saw some other item that you're not actively interested in right now, or maybe you just don't have enough money. So for example, you were browsing for a new TV and you saw the new Sony PlayStation and you just want to add it to the wish list and buy a little bit later. There can be some others. I mean, depending on the type of the shop that we're talking about, it can have some bonus points, some messages, and so on. But just let's consider these four for now. Okay. I just want you to understand the whole thought process behind that. So we now have some big elements, some groups of elements, in fact, because any of those can be split others, right? Now, before we try and split each of those into the smaller elements, I would like us all to think, like, what is the most common element or group of elements the user is going to seek in the profile screen? What is the most important thing that user is going to look for in their profile? If you consider a user that has made at least one purchase, or even a returning customer who has done a couple, would they care too much about their payment or shipping information? Probably not so much, unless they're doing a couple purchases a month and maybe have several delivery addresses, home office, another office, and their parents' home, etc. But even then, it's probably not the top priority. The thing that users would want to see the most, I'm pretty sure, is the recent transactions and their status. For example, let's say you've ordered a camera online and the anticipated delivery is anywhere between 1 and 3 business days. Of course, you're optimistic, and the next day you start checking the purchase status and track the delivery progress. Doesn't sound familiar to you? Well, it does to me, at least. Another case, both common and quite important for the user, is, let's say you've ordered a t-shirt online. As soon as it's delivered, you realize you picked the wrong size. Or even worse, the store sent you a wrong size. Of course, you are irritated and you want to return or replace the t-shirt as soon as possible. Again, you go back into your profile screen, you check your recent transactions, and then you figure out how you want to return it. Why am I explaining those cases? Because it's an important part of creating any mockup. You don't just draw it, you should think and analyze what's the purpose of every element. Is it the right place or not? The recent purchases is not only the most frequently sought block, it's also a big one, and I think it makes sense to display at least something like 4 or 5 recent purchases, or maybe even more, and I want to make sure I allocate enough space for it. So, which is why I'm going to put it somewhere on top. And again, resize. Now, similar to the recent purchases, the user might want to see their wish list from time to time to check the prices, availability, special offers. It has a similar structure to the recent purchases list. I would say its value is a bit lower than the purchases list, but higher than others. So I would put it just below the purchases list or the recent transactions list, and also make quite big. Now, why is that? Because the wish list is something that the business needs, not only the user. Every business wants to make as much of their returning users as possible, which is why it is extremely important to have the wish list. That's kind of the business background around it. Now, we still have pretty much space here, so what I would probably do, I would try to squeeze in the user payment information like a small second column. The same about user shipping information. Why would I do that? Because there is not too much information in those blocks to begin with, and also when you actually need to get to your shipping or payment information, you don't want to spend hours looking for it in your profile screen. So speaking of the recent transactions, let's get back to it. What items is it going to consist of? So first and foremost, it's some kind of title or the name for the item. Let me use the paragraph of text. let's say we're buying some polo shirt, size. So that's sort of the title of the item you have purchased. But if you think of it, is it the title that you are most likely to look at when you're browsing through the goods you have purchased? Now it would take a bit long to explain why, but I would just give you a summary. In most cases, the users navigate based on the visual information, which is normally a photo of an item. So it makes perfect sense to add a photo, and which is why all the big players in the market add photos there. Now, what else you would want to say in your recent purchases is the status of your delivery. Say you have just ordered it and it's got the status paid. Now, likewise, it can be delivery in progress, for example. For some other item like Nike boots. Right? What else is important in the recent transactions? I'm pretty sure that price is quite relevant too. So, for example, it can be $29.99 for the shirt, and for the boots, let's say $39.99. Sometimes you also want to explain to your audience why you put different, of course, they're like paid and delivery in progress. In order to explain things, there is a nice thing that can be used, which is a callout. It immediately will draw the attention of your audience to something, and use the arrow to connect it. As I've already mentioned, you can not always explain everything in the mockup. But what you can do is you can add the callout and explain what is going on there. The status of the transaction can be A, paid, B, delivery in progress, and C, delivered. Okay. Now, I've already mentioned the case when you've ordered something and you've got the wrong size or something similar. So what you might also want to do is to add the option to open claim, for example, or return the item. See, I've made it stand out like a hyperlink here. Let's think of the wish list now. As I've already said, it's pretty similar to the recent transactions, but there is one thing that will differentiate it for sure. So you will also want to have the images. You will also want to have the description. But the status of the transaction is irrelevant in this case because you haven't ordered it yet. What is relevant, though, is the availability of the item. There can be two different options. It can be in stock. or out of stock. The price is relevant as well. Say like that, 19.99. And then the option that should be available for the user is not to return, but rather to buy, because we don't need this wish list just for the information purposes, right? What we want to do is ideally we want to return the visitor into the customer. It can be buy or add to cart or whatever. Now, you can see that in this mockup, we have reflected different states of the app as well. There is the status, which can be, as I've mentioned here, paid, delivery in progress, and delivered. There can be the availability of the item in the wish list, that is in stock and out of stock. And if something is out of stock, in fact, it doesn't make a lot of sense to add the option to buy, which means we can make it disabled. In this way, user is not going to be able to click it and add it to the cart. Oh, it doesn't work really well with hyperlinks, but it does with buttons. So there is the disabled state for the button, if we call the button buy. See, it will be enabled in one case and disabled in the other. Now, in some cases, when there is a single element on the screen that can be in one state or the other, like if the user shipping information, it can be filled in or filled out. There is no way it can be filled in and not filled in, apologies, at the same time. What we will do in this case is similar to what we've done with the no connection message. We will just copy the mockup. And fill the user shipping information in. For example, user shipping information. Something like that. No, it's not my address. It's just a made up. So to give the user a hint that they want to add the shipping information, we might want to add an option here. It can be a hyperlink, for example, that would say fill in your shipping details. And to be even more convincing, we can say for faster. Now this would reflect two different states, okay? And it will be immediately clear to your audience that in one case user has already filled in the information, in the other it's still empty. But to make it even more obvious, you can add a corresponding call out and explain all the different situations. Now I have prepared a couple options of the profile screen previously. So just to give you an overview, what can you do with Balsamiq, for example? This is a similar type of screen layout where you got the risk and the wish list and the payment and shipping details filled in. You may also notice that I added the HTTP address here, which is also possible. and the breadcrumbs that would help user navigate across the screens. Because obviously, if you're in the profile screen, you may and you will want to go back into the main screen, which has got all the items that you can buy. A bit of different approach to doing that is to have the tabs. This example illustrates the use of vertical tabs, in which case you have the purchases list, and then the wish list, the payment details, shipping details, etc., etc. Now, why I wanted to show different options of that, is because whenever you've got lots of items that you have purchased, you will immediately face the problem how you display them to the user. There are a couple ways to do that. You can add the pagination, for example, in which case, if you have more than, say, 4 items, if you have 6 or 7, you would have 2 pages, 1 and 2. In my case, I have something like 20 or more purchases because I've got 4 pages and then something else and then the last one, which means I definitely am a very valuable customer to this service. Okay. And another way you can deal with that is the horizontal tabs. That's the most common way, I think, where you again have the purchase history, your favorited. I just named it in a different way. That's the same as the wish list. Some payments and shipping screen and the settings screen, whatever can be added into it. Now, just to briefly summarize what we've gone through, right? So you've seen a couple examples of mockups. You've seen how it can be created from scratch. I would highly recommend everyone to dig a bit deeper into such thing as user experience. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's the UX or user experience. It's the combination of functionality and user interface design. It's the combination of both functionality and perception. The user experience is something that the product managers, owners, business analysts have to work with. That is the logic behind your thinking, why you would put things in such order, why you need specific elements on this screen, why you want to have different types of tabs, vertical or horizontal, etc., etc. Also, I would highly recommend to everyone to at least try and draw some mockups. I mean, as I've already said, there are design mockups that designers can do, but they don't always have enough time or capacity, or not always the project team composition allows to hire a designer. So it can be anyone who draws the mockups, but most often it's obviously done by the product owner or business analyst. It can also happen that several people are involved in the process of requirements definition, and then it's up to them to decide who is going to do that. So for example, if you act as a proxy product owner, but then there is an overseas product owner, you might want to decide between the two of you who is going to do that. But there is no strict rule, I would say. The mockups are not a mandatory tool in any sort of methodology or delivery process, but it makes your life so much easier that I definitely recommend it to everyone. At least try it. If you think that you don't have enough skills or talent to draw anything, you shouldn't be. You've got so many tools. We've just looked at one, but there are others, obviously, that literally anyone can draw a mockup using them. Now, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Okay, I see some comments here. Yes, we definitely need to include taxes for the US market. That is so true. Um, so how do you describe the relation? Click on some not obvious button between mockup screens. Okay, if you're speaking about transitions, if that is the question, that is a wider conversation. So the mockup is generally a representation of a specific screen or a specific state of the screen. Okay, a sequence of mockups that illustrate how user is moving across different states is generally referred to as a wireframe. So the wireframe is a combination of mockups, and in this way, indeed, you can. Let me try and share it quickly. You can show that, for example, here, if user has connection or doesn't have the connection, when they tap on any option, they would go into this no connections journey. Then if user does have the connection, they will go into the app. So if we're talking about the wireframe, for example, so ideally we would need to have a series of screens here, not just the registration screen. But then there would be another one that would be the app itself, the app home screen. I'm not going to draw anything inside, but that's pretty much how it works. And then you would add a comment on top of the first line. User doesn't have connection, and then here user does have the connection and successfully logs in. Does it answer the question? So what resources can you advise to check out, purchase to study user experience and get better at user experience? Books, online, offline courses, websites, etc. Okay, so I would definitely recommend the books by Jacob Nielsen. This is probably the first or one of the first people who ever tried to study the design, the user interface design, and they've got some good findings in terms of the user experience. So if you're seeking some fundamental knowledge, I would definitely recommend the books by Nielsen, especially the latest ones, because this is something that develops very soon, very fast. Now there are also different studies based on the industry you're in. So if we're talking about the e-commerce, for example, there are blogs and communities that deal around that. If we're talking about music industry, for example, there are different experts, different markets. So if you're seeking a very specific knowledge set, then I would recommend you make sure you get the industry right, and also the type of the app you are working on. So there is no clear answer to that, I'm afraid, but you can post me a question after the webinar, and I will try to find something for you based on the industry you're working in. Do you have an experience when developers and designers or other business analysts understood mockups differently? Not the mockups, but rather the logic behind the mockups. So I already told about the wireframes. So if you just draw one mockup and you don't add the specific instructions to your user story, like for example, what should happen if there is no connection? And many things can happen. As I mentioned, there is no such thing as common sense. It's an illusion. So for one developer, the common sense would be to just close the app and let it crash. For other developer, it would be to display the no connection message. For the third developer, it would be just to do nothing, and keep the user on the registration screen. So yeah, people normally understand the mockups in pretty much the same way, but the edge cases that are built around the mockup can be treated in a different way. So that's why I'm saying that if there is any specific behavior, or any behavior in general, in fact, that is related to the user story or to the piece of functionality you're working on, you should add it separately. Not anything can be done by mockups, but it definitely helps. Hope that answers the question. All right, I don't see any other questions, so I guess this is it. Thank you very much for your participation, for your interest. I hope you clarified certain bits for yourself, and this will help you, again, hopefully, in your further career, in your professional development. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to post them, email me, and yeah, I will see if the webinar has been recorded. If it has, I will share it. And yeah, otherwise, I will probably do another one in the nearest time, maybe in a week or two. So if you want to go through it again, you're very welcome. And thank you too, guys, and have a nice weekend. Bye.